Welcome to the Weekly Dose Podcast, your one-stop shop for the weekly news in incretin mimetic therapies, with your host, ManOnMounjaro, Dave Knapp. Welcome to the Tuesday, June 18th, 2024 episode of On the Pen, the Weekly Dose, your one-stop shop for obesity news, diabetes news, GLP-1 medications, incretin mimetic therapies. I'm your host, Dave Knapp, ManOnMounjaro. That's why I'm here. You are on the pen. That's why you're here. Wegovy, Saxenda, Victoza, Trulicity, Mounjaro, and Zepbound. That's what we talk about here. And we're not going to waste any time getting into it this week because there's a ton to cover, especially in the world of advocacy. So this past week, unfortunately, what we saw was a big uptick in PBMs sending out letters to their customers, basically telling them that they are changing BMI requirements. They're changing who they're going to allow to prescribe you GLP-1 medications. They are changing so much about the landscape of GLP-1s, and I think we're about to see a deluge because this is going to start happening and proliferating around the country as these small little pockets are being used as sort of test grounds to see how they can roll out these changes, what kind of pushback they can get away with. I think what you saw this past week was some pushback starting to happen within the community, and it started with OnThePen.com. Now, if you're not following OnThePen.com, that's our website here, and I think that it is super important that you go over and sign up for email alerts here. But we dropped this this blog post earlier this week that allows you to contact your state representatives, both at the Senate level and the Congress level. And then we put this form letter together that you can download and basically personalize and send off to your representatives to have them advocate and understand how important it is to you that they be advocating for PBM reform. Now, that's again at OnThePen.com. Now, on this topic, we are going to have a special guest on the pen on Thursday night. If you have followed the show, you're no stranger to Lee from Lee Fits In. Now, Lee is fresh off, I believe, a Good Morning America appearance last week. And he's done a deep dive into something called the USPSTF. Now, basically, this is a organization that was created by the federal government that provides guidelines and recommendations basically for the prevention of preventable disease. And there's a mandate baked within the Affordable Care Act that basically requires insurance companies to cover medications and treatments that can lead to the preventable treatment of disease. Now, obviously, that sounds a lot like what GLP-1s do. And so Lee is going to come on the show on Thursday night and discuss from his perspective what he thinks needs to happen. And we will be giving you some more tools at OnThePen.com on how you can advocate for this organization to expedite their testing, their required testing, in order to hopefully get GLP-1s put into that category of a preventable treatment for the disease of obesity. Now, of course, all of this news is on the heels of Blue Cross Blue Shield Michigan restricting access by raising BMI, effectively banning you from getting your GLP-1s from telemedicine and a host of other things, including joining their health and wellness program to get access to GLP-1s. We saw similar actions come out from Express Scripts, but this is interesting news from a outfit called benefitspro.com, sort of tracks benefits being offered in around the healthcare industry. Listen to this stat because this is very interesting. When you talk about accessibility expanding and more employers adding obesity coverage to their plans, it's important to put that into context of these numbers. 74% of employers that provide GLP-1 coverage have or are considering access restrictions such as raised BMI thresholds, coverage or treatment limits requiring step therapy, and a behavioral modification process. So you see more and more barriers, even with the advancements that we've made in getting employers to cover these medicines. You see more and more moves to not cover them. And so this is why I think, unfortunately, over the next 6 months, 12 months, you're going to see the conversation of compounds really, really start to come back into the fold as far as which ones are the best ones to use. What should we be considering? I really recommend that you go back and check out the podcast from a few weeks back where we covered the difference between 503A and 503B pharmacies. This is a really important thing to understand. 503A pharmacies have been historically in existence to make prescriptions on an individual basis, basically compounding some sort of medication with another, or removing an ingredient because of an allergy or maybe a dose that's not available on the general market. They're great. They're an indispensable part of our healthcare system. But when you talk about manufacturing drugs on a scale, right? That's what 503B pharmacies exist to do. There's actually legislation that sort of mandates that we have them and that they have the capacities to ramp up drug production in the event that there are prescription drugs that are in shortage. And what we saw this past week was articles floating around that are telling us that drugs in the United States are at an all-time high for the amount of shortage. So going back 10, 15 years ago, there may have been 10, 12 drugs floating around on the FDA shortage list. We have now over 400 drugs in shortage. That's why you hear me talking about what a big deal it is that Eli Lilly is investing billions of dollars into API, active pharmaceutical ingredient manufacturing in the US, because access to critical medications are super, super important. It is a matter of national security. If we don't control our supply chain for the drugs that we need to live, antibiotics, diabetes medicines, etc., then we are in a really bad way if anything hits the fan with the supply chain. And if 2020 taught us nothing, it is imperative that we have a handle on the supply chain, especially when it comes to critical access to medications. So you just see the importance of an investment like Eli Lilly. I think it's something to the tune of $9 billion that they are investing into a plant in Indiana to manufacture the API for tirzepatide, or for Mounjaro and Zepbound, which is tirzepatide. So kudos to Eli Lilly. This is going to be a huge topic of conversation going forward. Make sure you check out that episode on 503A and 503B pharmacy. Some more interesting news as we talk about supply chain. We know that the huge kink in the supply chain for GLP-1 medications over the last year and a half has really been the pens, the injector pens being a major kink in the supply chain, because they are, in Dave Ricks, the CEO of Eli Lilly's words, some of the most complex things on the planet to manufacture, right? Not really what you want to hear when you're facing the kind of shortages that we've been facing with especially Zepbound and Mounjaro. But check this out. This is really fascinating. Vivani, which is a company that is developing an injectable implant called NPM 119, received the go-ahead to continue with clinical trials for a 6-month implantable GLP-1. Now, this is a fascinating concept, because for 6 months, you'll have a slow release of the medication. Now, whether that's titratable, right? Whether there's a mechanical element to it that can be sort of titrated as the dose goes up or down. I know that's the big initial reaction people have, is what if you're having some sort of adverse reaction from a side effect standpoint? How do you dial back the dose? I'm sure that's all part of what they're figuring out right now in these clinical trials. And this will be a fascinating one to watch, a 6-month implantable GLP-1. Now, initially, they were testing this with exenatide, which is the first GLP-1. It was on the market under the brand name of Byetta for many, many years. This is when we talk about this class of medications not being new. We're talking about Byetta essentially being the first to market back over 20 years ago. And this was the first GLP-1 that Vivani was looking at with the NPM 119. Of course, you're probably going to see newer generations of the GLP-1 medications used in this device, including semaglutide from Novo Nordisk, and in the future, probably others as well. So this will be a very interesting one to look at. That's, again, Vivani. The link to the article is in the description of the show notes. One of the most commonly asked questions on any number of my channels, including the YouTube channel and the TikTok channel. Make sure you're following us everywhere. Very close to 10,000 followers on YouTube, just about 12 followers away. But we got some information this week from a team of medical experts who are telling us what is the optimum diet on a GLP-1 medication. Now, there has been a lot of different ideas exchanged online about what diet people should be following or what they shouldn't be following. I as a GLP-1 communicator, have always shied away from giving any advice about what you should do because obesity is a very complex disease, right? And there are different reasons that people are in the condition that they are from a behavioral standpoint, a genetic standpoint, and a whole host of things. It's just not a one size fits all disease. There is a wide spectrum. And so to sit and give advice to somebody is in the position that I'm in, I feel like is not wise. But this is some interesting news because this comes from a team of medical experts that have developed a list of evidence-based nutritional recommendations to assist clinicians in treating patients with anti-obesity medications. And here's sort of the gist of it. They are recommending that you get at least 60 to 70 grams of protein a day, that you combine healthy carbohydrates constituting 45 to 65% of your overall intake. So not a low carb diet. Obviously, if you're diabetic, this is going to probably have different stipulations, but this is for the obesity management drugs. Fats constituting between 20 and 35% of energy intake, with saturated fats limited to less than 10% of that intake, and about 21 to 25 grams of fiber for women and 30 to 38 grams of fiber daily for men. 2 to 3 liters of fluid, including water, low-calorie beverages, and low-fat dairy. So I will link again in the show notes some more information that you can find about this. But this, again, was a team of medical experts developing some evidence-based guidelines for the dietary recommendations for those who are taking a GLP-1 for obesity management. This was published in the Obesity Society's flagship journal. So very, very interesting information. Shout out to Lisa Neff, who was the primary author on that one, and the executive director of the Global Medical Affairs for Eli Lilly. So one shout out I want to give to Clark Kent this week. Clark Kent, you can find him over on X at Get Obesity News. He is the one who provides a rundown of all the news for the week, kind of helps me out by putting together these notes. So if you appreciate the work that he does and you want to follow sort of in real time with him, follow at Get Obesity News on Twitter. Another great account to follow over on Twitter is at GLP-1 News, another great resource for some GLP-1 news. So just a couple great follows if you're into the GLP-1 news. We're going to have a great show this week on the Pen Thursday night. I hope you'll join us. We'll probably be uploading that podcast or that show to the podcast as well later this week, because we are going to have such an important discussion with Lee from Lee Fits In. I hope that you'll join us. Until next week, thank you for being here. Thank you for being the best part of what we do at On the Pen. And until next week, enjoy yourselves. Thanks for being here.